Brilliant. Welcome everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for more people to join us. Hope everyone's well. Got some AI communication. Wonderful. Brilliant. I think we'll get started and people will hopefully filter in as we go. We will be recording as well and sharing this, so if you're unable to be here or if your colleagues aren't able to join us, then hopefully this will be available for you in the next couple of days. A huge thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and a huge thank you to everyone that's joining us today and taking the time. Charlotte, can I just check you're on? Great. And taking the time to be with us. This is really exciting for us. It's currently Global Intergenerational Week, which is a big day in our calendar, and a real opportunity to kind of advocate and champion this way of working and living and building and just being. And we're joined today by a great panel and some incredible insight and expertise, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion later on. Just for context, Intergenerational England, we're a national not-for-profit organisation, and we're really dedicated to advancing intergenerational practice through advocacy and research and system changes. We're a strategic body, and we really champion an intergenerational approach, one that places focus on that human generational connection, but also places emphasis on the social challenges and the structures that surround people and place, and how do we work together to really support and develop inclusive and age diverse systems and structures. Today is really exciting. It's the launch of our new webinar series, Let's Talk. And this is really building on our Talking Generations campaign, which places conversation and dialogue right at the heart of change. How do we encourage empathy, understanding, mutual respect through creating spaces where people can talk and share their experiences and expertise and hopefully learn and develop from one another. Today, we're talking about housing as one of the pillars of society, as one of the main areas of our community ecosystems. And we're joined by an incredible panel. We've got Rebecca Rieley, who's Head of Communities and Projects at HACT. Thank you, Rebecca, for being here. Omair Haider, who's Managing Director of Millennium Care Group. Miranda Foster, who's the Head of Affordable Housing Programmes and Products at Homes England. And Lois Beech, who's Consultancy and Partnership Manager at Housing, Learning and Improvement Network, Housing LIN. The format of today will be kind of the first half will be a panel discussion where each speaker will have a chance to talk about their specific area and expertise and interest, and then we'll go into a bit more of a conversation, and there's opportunities for people to submit questions and be part of the conversation. So please do use the Q&A function, use the chat function, however best it works for you. We will be recording this, so I mean there's no cameras on anyway, so hopefully all okay for everyone. For us and for the world of Talking Generations, we really believe it starts with a conversation. So let's talk, shall we? I'm going to hand over initially to Rebecca Rieley, who is here from HACT. And I just want to kind of get a sense, Rebecca, from your work at HACT, where do you think housing associations currently sit within this intergenerational context? Where are the opportunities for thinking in this long-term way? And specifically in your world, where does intergenerational sit within the conversation?
Oh, thank you, Emily, and great to be here to have this discussion and conversation today with everybody. I think just first off, if there's any newbies on the call to the housing association world, housing associations are not-for-profit organisations set up to provide affordable homes, most often social homes, for people across the UK. And alongside that, they're often set up as well to help nurture thriving communities in place. And in England, over 20% of people live in social housing. So the engagement of housing associations in this space to look at how we nurture intergenerational approaches is really important. So it's really nice to be part of the conversation. when thinking about this question ahead of today's conversation, um, it made me think a lot about recent research that HACT have been doing in collaboration with Intergenerational England and two housing associations called SNG and Clarion. And through that collaboration, we've been looking at how do you sort of measure the impact of intergenerational approaches in a housing context. But before we could even get there, we had to look at definitions and actually really unpick what did intergenerational approaches, what do they look like? How do they manifest in a housing context and for housing associations? And as a result of that sort of thinking and that really relevant sort of tangent that we then took the research down, we were able to sort of help group some sort of key ways in which housing associations engage with intergenerational approaches. So I'm going to try and just share my screen just to share that snapshot so you can all see what we landed on. Okay. Hopefully that's sharing for you right now. Fantastic. Okay, so we ended up with sort of 8 key areas where we think housing associations engage with intergenerational approaches. And these almost sit on a sort of bit of a sliding scale or a ladder where you have sort of maybe some communal spaces where there might be a few benches, which by default could do some encouraging of people to sit down, connect in a communal area. Then there's the sort of thinking about allocations. Actually, if we were really strategic about housing allocations and where people are offered homes, how we look at integrating a variety of different ages and generations in a place. Actually, if we did that in a strategic way to intentionally bring a mix of generations, nurture a mix of generations in a local area, then that curation could also be classed as an intergenerational approach in a housing context. Then we had other sort of approaches which leaned on if you were at the very early stages of developing homes and developing new communities and places, you've got an opportunity there from the very design to be thinking carefully about how we bring people together and sort of purpose build intergenerational communities with a collection of partners. So we can circulate this sort of snapshot after today's webinar, but I think for us, this really helped to bring to the surface the different types of approaches that many housing associations are taking. And for some housing associations, they're really well integrated and committed to intergenerational connection and approaches and taking that lens. And we'll be looking at these definitions going, yeah, we do a whole range of different things. Actually, we touch on that. An example of which is some great work going on with Phoenix Community Housing and Melfield Gardens development in London, where they are intentionally built, designed and supporting people to move into homes that are designed for people who are older, but also nearby university students. And within those terms and conditions, there's social connection clauses around encouraging the students to activate communal spaces and to think of activities and ways to bring people together. And for the older generations coming into that space, they are they want to be part of this community. There's an upfront expectation that this is going to be a really warm and welcoming place to live. So there's a whole host of different ways that housing associations can be involved and are involved, and some are at the very start of their journeys, and some are really well integrated into that. So I'll just pull sharing screen there. And when thinking about the sort of second part of your question there, Emily, about like the opportunities that exist to embed this thinking, I think the key motivating factors for many housing associations on this agenda is their real commitment to creating thriving communities. And we know that communities, in order to thrive, need to be socially connected. They need to be places where people feel that they can belong. And intergenerational approaches, through our sort of research together, but also through those sort of bright spot examples that we see, really help showcase how intergenerational relationships and communities are a key way in order to help communities to thrive at a very individual level, for those involved in those relationships. But then at a broader community level, when there's a movement of that and that movement of connection, actually we're creating really nice, warm, welcoming places to live. And when we can do that, then that creates an environment that feels very welcoming and inclusive and can open the doors for much broader conversations about diversity, community cohesion, and other challenges that we see many communities facing today. So I think I'll pause there. But in summary, I think that's my sort of initial take on where housing associations engage with the topic and the opportunities at hand.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rebecca. And I think it was a really good overview of just the breadth and depth. I know we've talked a lot about, how far and wide this approach and this way of working really goes, and how it can be embedded and integrated into existing systems. I also really liked, the social connection clause as a concept, as a way of thinking about actual policy development. You talked a lot there about housing associations, and I think quite a nice segue into Omair there around bringing in that sort of care home, retirement, social care side of things. And I wonder, Omair, just from that perspective, often we see sectors and communities work in these silos, and we talk a lot about the silos of age or silos of sectors. How do you think intergenerational housing models can help bridge these gaps, particularly in the concept of housing and care?
Thank you, kind of Rebecca, for that handover to me, and kind of Emily for the introduction. I've just created just a brief slideshow, kind of just to talk through our experiences and first looking at the problem, the definition, and some solutions through some illustrative case study examples that we have some experience of. So the question that we're asking ourselves today is, how can intergenerational housing communities break down silos, and how through those silos can inclusive later living environments be creative? And in doing so, I'm broadly looking at 3 illustrative examples of how architecture, master planning, and space planning can create and connect generations, but also how it supports inclusivity and social impact. But firstly, I think just addressing and looking at what the problem is, there's an increasing trend in age segregation in the UK. A child today has less than 5.5% chance of living in the same neighbourhood as someone over the age of 65, and that's increased by over 300% compared to the 1990s. As a consequence of that, the trend is only set to get even worse. By 2024, the number of people living in care homes is expected to increase by approximately 30 to 40%. Because of that, over 65s, in order for the over 65s to be evenly distributed amongst children, over a third of the population would need to relocate. And care home and retirement communities are being pushed geographically from contemporary life. And what we generally tend to see now, specifically in some more towns, is that towns tend to have more of a youthful core. Housing developments don't take into consideration a mix and typologies of age and segregation, and in many towns, retirement communities are being pushed further and further away out to the suburbs. But why are care homes and retirement communities operating in silos? And it's a question that we kind of have been asking ourselves. And typically, could it be down to kind of architectural typologies that are driven by culture in care communities? Typically, care homes can be seen as institutions focused on the objectification of people in care, where care is delivered associated to tasks. There's a risk focus, there's a consideration on over privacy, and as a consequence of that, it creates closed off communities, disincentivizing the public from entering buildings and residents leaving. And in essence, many care communities and care villages are seen as grey ghettos. They're exclusively for the purview of people to either live in after the age of 55 or over 65, or to provide care in. And ultimately, one of the questions and challenges that we've been looking at is how that architectural typology is driven by the medicinal model of care for the aging. Typically, someone in a care home can be seen as having a collection of problems to be solved, and those problems are solved through the pharmacological interventions with little consideration given to social prescribing, healthy psychology, and psychosocial interventions in care homes. And part of the problem is broadly there isn't a significant consideration given to the strength-based approach to people aging in care retirement villages and communities. Part of the solution is considering how intergenerational communities developed and considering firstly what that definition of an intergenerational community is. And in order for an intergenerational community to thrive, there have to be meaningful relationships where people are teaching and learning from each other. And that has to be at the core of it, but also for it to be mutually beneficial and sustainable. And in order for that to thrive, people have to be located in close geographic proximity to one another. And we've been working on a couple of schemes within Millennium Care in our strive to provide an antidote to that by looking at the role that specifically architecture and master planning has to play in supporting people to break down silos and mix. One of them is Porrick Care Village, which is a small care village in the heart of the Rossendale Valley in Lancashire. We've been working with architects to consider how the internal environment, for instance, support people to mix through generations, through open plan living arrangements, where the old and young are mixing in social dining settings, but also through musical activity and enjoying green spaces. On the terrace in the green open spaces, the proposals are to have intergenerational birdwatching decks, an intergenerational dining bistro, a rooftop terrace with playground spaces as a connective thread to demonstrate that the old and young alike can mix, and in doing so looking to break down that stigma and barrier to support parents and grandparents and grandchildren and nieces and nephews all to mix on the one site by looking at how the role that architecture has to play. It's just another illustrative example of the roof terrace on this scheme that shows, someone in a wheelchair engaging in planting, children on the slide, and engaging in kind of ornithology as a meaningful activity. But also kind of considering how intergenerational inclusivity and design can be fostered through bird watching, woodland walking trails, and how the young and old alike can mix through the extensive on-site greenery that has therapeutic benefits for people. Secondly, we've looked at another scheme we've been working on, which is a current care village. It has 139 care home residents across 3 care homes, 200 staff and approximately 10 new parents every single year in the care village. The care village is in a semi-rural location, which creates sustainable challenges for regular and sustained intergenerational activities. Intergenerational activities in the care village are regular, but sometimes can be met with mixed and limited successes because of our semi-rural location. The proposals for this are to incorporate a nursery in the centre of the site to kind of demonstrate that it's intergenerational at its core and essence, with the nursery being at the centre of the site, supporting facilities such as chicken coops, friendship benches, open day plan spaces, bird watching decks, woodland walking trails, and vegetable growing allotments. But also then looking at another illustrative example of Belong Chester that supports the residents to take positive risks through this resident, June, who's taking one of her residents off for a Pramble, which is an adapted device that supports residents to take children for a walk along the canal. And then also looking at that scheme in Chester, it's had significant benefits of nursery parents saying that they've seen their daughter interacting with ladies in the bistro that's brought tears to their eyes, and residents saying that's the best thing about living in the care home is sharing their time with children. They mean everything to me. But then also kind of looking at how by creating intergenerational spaces, it creates socially productive use of land that can create more of a social benefit and yield than just looking at housing as a typical housing typology. It supports strong purpose-driven, highly skilled employment centres, but co-location also supports natural and spontaneous interactions with more genuine relationships between the young and old alike. But also looking at intergenerational inclusivity. The DWP reports that the significant barriers faced by carers, specifically mothers, in accessing job opportunities. And our experience has specifically shown us that carers that become new parents struggle to get back to work because they struggle to find appropriate nursery placements. By having a co-located nursery located in close proximity to a care or retirement village, that inclusivity is extended further to the care home resident, the children, but also the parent as the middle generation. but also looking further afield into kind of future opportunities and where further opportunities lie. The question needs to be asked is what can be done in terms of planning policy to unlock green and grey spaces to support the young and old alike to mix in green spaces and benefit from the therapeutic benefits of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Omair. And there was so much in there. And I think for me, one of the main areas that you touched on there was the social wider determinant of health and well-being and life. And, you know, that housing is obviously such a core part of that. But alongside that, how do you design from architecture and design right through to sort of the spaces in between and the connection opportunities between people, I think is so fundamental to actually how we build and how we support communities. And I think it was really interesting there as well, you know, the example that you gave us around that care and nursery, which is such an important dyad and really an interesting model of practice. And how do we consider how we want to learn, how we want to age throughout the life course? And I think that's quite a nice segue again into Miranda and Homes England. But, you know, how do you build communities and homes for all ages, for all people, to really consider and complement people as they age and as they journey through life? And my question to you, Miranda, would be, you know, from a Homes England perspective, where does intergenerational housing or that approach or thinking align with the priorities at Homes England? And where do you see the challenges to really overcome and scale these models? Similar to what I mentioned and Rebecca mentioned, you know, there's lots of diverse models in this world, but, you know, how do we really place the value on them? And from that perspective, how do we then scale and replicate?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll give a quick introduction to Homes England, because I know not everybody knows who we are and what we do. So we are the government's housing and regeneration agency, and our role is to support the delivery of quality housing and placemaking, but also help create jobs and locally economic growth. So it's really about building places as well as homes, and intergenerational plays a big part in that. At the moment, our role as government sees it is to accelerate the house building. We've obviously got the very ambitious 1.5 million new homes in this Parliament. And we have things like our New Homes Accelerator programme to speed up delivery on large sites. But we also work on the new towns and major schemes. So working with the New Towns Task Force. We convene land as a master developer, and we put infrastructure in or fund infrastructure through grants and loans as needed. We also have our affordable homes programme. So at the moment, really targeted on maximising delivery of new socially rented homes, but we fund affordable rent to buy, shared ownership, older person shared ownership as well. And that funding's been boosted by this government by £2.8 billion, which really shows you the commitment to that. And another key role for us is about supporting the housing market to be more diverse, so including support for SME builders, and we have things like the Levelling Up and Home Building Fund. So while most of you probably know us for Affordable Housing Grant, that's not all we do by a long shot. In terms of our strategic priorities, so those are the things on the left there, we have our mission, which is the central part of this, and we have our strategic priorities. And I think you can see that 3 out of the 5 of those have a really strong tie to this intergenerational side of things. So firstly, facilitating the creation of homes people need. Obviously, all ages, there is a housing shortage of affordable housing for people across all ages, and that. A key one being supporting the creation of vibrant and successful places, so places that people are proud of, that local leaders agree are needed. And I think you can't really have vibrant and successful places with a monoculture, so that it really draws on that part of, again, having homes and communities that work for all ages. and then looking at high quality homes in well designed places, as the people before me have alluded to. A lot of this is just about designing it right in the first place. You create the conditions for these communities to flourish, and that starts from building decent homes that people can afford to live in, but also making sure that the infrastructure's there and so on. And I think the other thing I've put out here is our sustainability and design outcomes, because again, it all pulls through there of making sure the key thing is that well-being part. And well-being is something that can be quantified and is something that has a measurable benefit on people's lives, by making sure that the services, the infrastructure in place, and the employment spaces are in place. That's how you draw people to an area and make sure that they have that mix to them. The movement part of, I think, from the previous example of seeing someone go for a preamble, which is my new favourite word. I love a portmanteau, but making sure that there are walking routes, making sure that it's accessible by public transport, that people aren't just stuck on the edge of nothing and can't get anywhere without a car, because it doesn't work for a lot of people, particularly as people age and potentially give up their vehicles, or people with young families find it harder to get around without a car. And then the other one that I'll draw out on here is that accessibility part. And those of you who have seen me talk before know that I do go on about this a lot, but I think it's really important that when you consider the accessibility of not just the homes themselves, but the environments that they're placed in, of adjustments that help one set of people typically help another. Everybody is probably familiar with the dropped curb effect of put in to support wheelchair users, but also helps people with prams, helps people who may be less steady on their feet, people who have visual impairments. And the more you can design homes and communities to have that accessibility, that wayfinding of how do you know where you are? Is it obvious to find your way around for people with dementia, for example? Also, it's going to help younger kids be more independent as they grow up. I won't spend all of my time talking about this, but I genuinely could. It's my favourite subject. So I suppose the difficult question you put to me is, how do we do this and how do we scale it up? And for us, this comes down to places and partners. We work really closely with local authorities and local stakeholders to find out what the needs are in their communities. We need to understand, because each place has a different makeup and has different needs. They might have a lot of one type of accommodation, but not another. So working with them to understand their priorities, and also working through partners. So we don't develop and sell or rent homes ourselves. All of our work is done through partners like housing associations, which have been referred to earlier, but also through your standard developers that you'll see their names on hoardings all of the time. So we try to bring people together to make things happen. And I wanted to show an example because it really does highlight the key to partnership working. So this Grange Park in Blackpool is a development that we funded through our Affordable Homes programme. So just over £5.5 million funding for 133 homes for affordable rent. It's a redevelopment of an area which had some social challenges, so some crime, antisocial behaviour, but also things like fuel poverty and a lack of suitable homes for people, particularly things like larger families or older persons or people with disabilities. So this development has homes from 1 bedroom older persons retirement flats through to accessible specialist bungalows for people who have access needs, disabled people, and then from 2 to 6 bedroom houses. So you can see how it starts to tick a lot of those boxes that were spoken about earlier with regards to allowing, with larger homes, intergenerational living, should people want that in one home, but also on the site having that range of homes and range of people living there, allowing people to live independently as long as possible. All of the homes here were built to M42, so wheelchair adaptable standards, and most of the retirement homes and bungalows were also to M43, so they're already wheelchair accessible. And again, M42 is brilliant because it allows people to age in place, and I think there's a recent Housing England report talking about how that's actually the aspiration for a lot of people. The more we can develop like that, the more it allows homes to adapt to the people that live in them over time. It also reduces cost to local authorities in the long term, because the more you can build adaptable homes that change as people's needs do, the less things like disabled facilities grant are needed. Some of the sort of quality of life things here, like reducing fuel poverty by making really energy efficient homes, are very important, because it's that well-being piece of, if people can afford to live in their homes more easily, they can then think about that next level out of being part of the community they live in. And the last thing I'll cover on this, it was a local firm who were appointed as the principal contractor of that. And I think some of the ways that they worked really highlight how you can bring communities together, even in the development of a place and the build. So they offered job opportunities for local unemployed people, and a total of 13 apprentices were recruited and continue to have jobs from this site. Local school children were given insight into careers in the development industry, and they linked in with the local youth club to do a bricklaying site visit. They did things with the schools on joinery workshops and construction days. And they'd also set up a fund to support community groups and other activities. So community church craft evenings and a secure bike shelter, and renovating a camping trailer for a scout group. And so I say all of these things because it's not just the homes and when they're done. It can start before, whilst things are still being developed. These homes were completed in September last year, but the way that the firm doing the construction approached it has already started to lay the foundations for that community.
Brilliant. Thanks, Miranda. And what a brilliant case study. I mean, I made so many notes. I've got so much to say. But, I think what's really exciting there is that, as you mentioned, at every stage, at every level of community, this intergenerational inclusive kind of piece of the puzzle was really part of considerations, and you know, designing for that longevity piece. You know, we are an aging society, and demographically we're changing rapidly, and placing emphasis on how do we design for people to live positive lives all the way through their life. I also think it was really interesting, you know, you placed real emphasis on the places and partnerships, and again, that intergenerational model is really there to highlight, you know, a person is not just where they live, it's how they get to places on transport, it's where they're educated, it's how they work, and really making that intergenerational partnership a core part of development and planning when you are looking at a new housing space or an architectural design. So there's so much learning there. I think, you know, we could talk on for ages, but I'm going to hand over to Lois now, who, you know, Housing England have a lot of experience in this area and have really championed intergenerational programs and design. And it would be great to hear from you, Lois, just on any innovative models that you've seen and what we can learn from that and how we can maybe move forward and build upon it.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. And yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It's really great to be part of the conversation. I guess the first thing maybe just to mention is that we're in the process of gathering some of these models and innovative models through the APPG inquiry that both Charlotte and Emily are part of. So we're currently doing an inquiry with the Housing and Care for Older People, APPG, into creating intergenerational communities. So to those on the call, we are doing a bit of a call for evidence at the moment around kind of what some of those best practice examples might look like. And I guess, the APPG is sort of focusing on three kind of key areas, but it's not to say that innovation doesn't exist outside of these three key areas. So the first is where we might kind of mix ages together in the same block. The second is where we might mix together ages on the same site, but in different types of accommodations. So touching on Miranda, your example at Grange Park. And then the third is sort of mixing ages together where, there might be a kind of specialist housing setting. So looking at some of the examples that Omair shared as well. But in terms of kind of what I see as some of the effective models, I wanted to first touch on one that I think is really important because whilst not part of the APPG inquiry, but it kind of looks at how we can use, I guess, existing homes, because I think home share is a really important example of how we can of a model of creating intergenerational connection whereby it brings together an older person or maybe somebody else that might need support to stay in their homes with younger people who tend to provide sort of companionship and help around the house. They often tend to provide about 10 hours a week of low level sort of practical support in return for an affordable place to live. So it's really touching on that requirement for affordable housing across the sector, but also touching on that kind of need for kind of some social and practical help amongst people that might have a kind of care and support need. And typically, I think I've done a bit of research into the cost of that, but typically what will happen is that the kind of householder fees will get paid to a kind of home share organisation. And normally that's about kind of £50 to £130 a month. So it kind of really shows you the kind of cost savings that somebody could experience living in that type of accommodation. And I guess as well as sort of some of those benefits, how can that be developed further? I think we probably don't talk enough about the home share model and how it can be used. So I think there's a big piece of kind of understanding for the public, but also professionals to explore the benefits of home share and also how it can be set up on a more local level. The second model that I wanted to touch on, and I think Rebecca, you've already sort of touched on it, but it's more kind of thinking about more intentional communities, I guess. So you've talked about the Melfield Gardens example, and if I just share my screen, hopefully you can see an image of it because it's just opened, I think a couple of weeks ago, it's just opened. So this is really about creating that intentional community within the same block of flats. So enabling kind of older and younger people to live alongside each other, but in sort of more separate spaces. And as Rebecca kind of mentioned, this is a partnership with Phoenix Community Housing, along with Goldsmith University. So there are 30 what they're calling 1 bed plus flats. So they're slightly larger than 1 bed accommodation, and those are for people over the age of 55. And then there are 2 flats for students that would be living, so it can accommodate 8 students from Goldsmith University. And the intention, as Rebecca said, is to kind of provide that sort of informal support to people whilst living on the same site. And this has really been, I think what's really interesting about this, it's been driven by Phoenix Community Housing, who their ethos is that they are resident-led and resident-owned. And I think it's also come from their sort of real strategic approach, where they've recognised that there are quite a number of people within their kind of more general needs housing stock that are living in sort of larger family homes, and they might not necessarily be able to maintain or they might not be that accessible, so they're kind of struggling at home, but there isn't really somewhere else for them to move to. But I think Phoenix have kind of come at it from the angle of, in order to support people to move somewhere that's more suitable to their needs, it needs to be a really attractive offer. And that's partly come from their experience developing a new extra care housing scheme called Hazelhurst Court, which is also really fabulous, beautifully designed scheme. But this example, it wanted to give, I guess, a different angle to what an attractive home could look like. So, you know, it identified that a number of those residents living in their kind of larger family-sized homes, but it might be only one person, were really struggling with things like socialization and loneliness. So trying to bring that in through the connection with Goldsmiths and the students there was really important to them. So I think in terms of how that can be adopted for wider use, it's really coming at it from that, what Phoenix have called like their chain lettings approach. So thinking about how can we support this as part of the wider context of an aging population, and trying to make the best use of the homes that we have available, but also give people, you know, really attractive alternatives effectively to encourage that move. And I think also part of the success here, and people have mentioned partnerships a lot as well, has come from that partnership with Goldsmiths, as well as the local authorities in Lewisham. I know there were some challenges around, and they had to get around things like how do these homes be, how are they allocated, and those sorts of things. So having that allocations policy in place with the council was really important. So I think there are quite a lot of steps that we need to understand from the Melfield example that can be replicated, and we're hoping to draw out further through the APPG. But yeah, really great example, and I think one of the first kind of really intentional intergenerational examples in the UK. And then the third example of innovation I just wanted to touch upon is sort of that more what Miranda's also touched upon in the Grange Park example, is that kind of developing a more multi-generational neighbourhood. So this is something we'll explore in our third APPG session. And I just want to touch really on one particular example, which is the development by the Nationwide Foundation called Oakfield in Swindon. So the intention here is really to create a multi-generational neighbourhood. It has a variety of different typologies of accommodation living alongside, situated alongside each other. So you'll see on the left there's the hub, which is a variety of different, I think it's different flats with different people from different ages can live alongside each other. They've got the age in place cottages, which is about developing accommodation for older people to kind of live well, you know, within their home. And then they've got the walk-up apartments, which are really interesting because they have sort of two front doors located next to each other, which lead on to kind of ground floor apartments to older people, and first floor apartments which are aimed at the younger generation. Having gone on holiday to and got some family in Holland, that already happens in Holland, and it's quite funny. My partner's got some family there, and like effectively that happens. Like the grandparents live on the bottom floor, and then above them there's some students from the nearby university. So it's really nice to see that kind of that international perspective coming through. But I think the key thing for Nationwide is that they are also providing that kind of affordable mix. So it's 30% of the homes were made available for affordable rent or shared ownership. And so I think that is really key. And I think Miranda touched on this, that so having that mix of typologies and mix of tenures is how we're going to kind of try and create and sustain more intergenerational communities, because it's enabling a wider pool of people from different sort of backgrounds sort of to come together and live within the same community. Let me just stop sharing. And I think you have touched on this as well, Miranda, but I think it's really important in terms of how we embed some of this into new towns as well. So I think the current emphasis on new towns is around creating sustainable, connected and livable places. So I think this makes them an ideal testbed really for that intergenerational design. But I just wanted to also touch on that kind of home share model, because I think sometimes we get into the the headspace of thinking about it is always about like something new, but actually most of the homes that we have that we live in now will be, you know, the homes we're going to live in the future. So it's how can we make the best use of kind of existing housing as well. I'll draw to a close there.
Thank you so much, Lois. And I think it was a really important point you made there, because we've kind of gone from neighbourhoods and affordable housing to, you know, intentional intergenerational care communities and now home share. And I think it's really showing this diversity of where this model sits across our current communities, across our new community models, and how it needs to be recognised, you know, at the forefront of planning and policy development. I'd love to open up to a bit of a conversation with the four of you. I also would like to invite our viewers to submit any questions or comments that they would like to pose to any of the panelists. So please do use the Q&A function, the chat function. Hopefully they're all working. And while we're waiting for that, I think, you know, a question to all of you, but maybe specifically to Rebecca to kick off. You know, we've talked a lot about these really exciting, innovative models of housing, and you know, there is an incline of understanding and an increase of development in this area. But where do you feel that data and research, you know, and funding, where did those elements play in all of this, and how do we again place emphasis to ensure that we move forward in the right direction, and a direction that is inclusive and, you know, at any stage of life, at any socio-economic state of play, you know, this idea can be embedded and thought about.
Yeah, oh, thanks, Emily. I think the role of data is key, and one of the realities I think driving that attention on data and impact measurement and learning is that we are in an age where public purses are tight, and also we're in an age where information and models are so easily accessible that if something were to wobble off course, people know about it before you've had time to course correct. So making sure that you've got your robust foundations for understanding the whys and the whats and the where you're going to invest money, attention, resource into intergenerational approaches in a housing context is really important. And I know it's something that we've been looking at with our housing association partners as well, around how can we perhaps better tell the story of the impact of intergenerational approaches in this context. And we've now, through the research we've done over the last year, developed an impact framework that takes into account the impact of intergenerational approaches and those relationships on individuals, what the impact is on a community level, and then there's some softer impacts that we foresee and believe to be there at a wider societal level. And that impact framework builds in social value metrics, which are very much rooted in a well-being model. So how do people experience an approach or a new home or neighborhood? What impact do they feel that has on them? And dependent on what their feedback is, that then generates your impact calculation as much as generating your social value or social return on investment valuation. So those sorts of measures are really useful to attract the ear, I believe, of people that wouldn't normally be drawn to this. I imagine a lot of us on the call are here because we feel it, we love this work, and we believe that it has real value. But how do we tell that story to a wider audience and attract this, make this attractive proposition to bring others on the journey with us? I think it's really important, and I think data can help tell the story and shift the narrative around that.
And I think if I can just build on that point, is I completely agree. You need the data for the people who are spending the money, whether that's investors, whether it's government. They need to be able to see what they're getting for it, and it's one of the reasons we at Homes England started our series of social value research, of looking at the value of what we do. One of the my favourite one that we've done is it does look at the well-being impact of older persons housing, and you know, would love to be able to expand that further. but the benefit of the research we've done is it puts a green book value on it. So it's in the language that the Treasury speaks. So now we can say, actually, by putting people in a home that meets their needs, it's got X amount more per year value. And yeah, I just completely echo that. The more data we can get like that, the more we can show that it is for Treasury worth spending their very limited funding on us and our housing.
If I can, I will attempt to give a bit of a explanation of some experience that we heard at the APPG around looking at this from a more kind of the private sector investment perspective. So we heard from Birchgrove, who are a retirement housing provider. They provide mainly sort of market rent retirement housing, but they were looking at a scheme that they had. I can't remember where it is now, but they were thinking about how to bring intergenerational I guess activity into their scheme, and how to allocate some of the apartments to younger people, what they're turning youngsters. But they effectively had like some really strong kickback from their like bank, effectively their like the bank loans that they were getting, effectively saying that because they were going to let some of the homes to young people who potentially wouldn't be there for the long term, that they would be let for less than the full market price. And because they fixed that value of the unit into perpetuity, that's resulted in effectively a deconstruction value, I think it was called, of £4 million. So they needed to kind of find this £4 million somewhere. So I think it's the learning from that is about how can we create a conversation around what are some of the benefits of intergenerational, how does it need to kind of be talked about from a sort of private finance perspective as well, so that sort of thing doesn't happen and it isn't really seen in that way. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm a specialist in all of that, but I think it's really interesting for us to hear that perspective from the APPG around, it's not just always about like social housing and how this can be achieved through that, but yeah, what are some of the more private funding mechanisms that need to be switched on to this effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really good point there. There's a huge amount of stakeholders that need to understand what this is all about, and that messaging piece and the narrative building, I think, is so foundational to how we advance understanding in this field. Mark in the audience has his hand up. I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to ask a question.
Emily, you may need to manually unmute.
I have, yeah. No, feel free to pop it in the chat, Mark, or we can share emails afterwards if you've got anything specific you want to add. And if there are any other questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat. Jerry Harmon mentioned that, you know, collaboration between all of us can have a positive impact on potential investors and government. And I think that is, you know, a really key point and a really key message from today's discussion as well. I would love to, we're kind of coming to an end, but I would love to kind of pose a question to all of the panel, just around, you know, we've talked highly about this model of practice. We've talked, you know, it's extremely relevant when you look at the commitment to building 1.5 million homes, when you look at the revival of the New Town strategy, when you look at kind of the wider sectors and our health systems and loneliness and social issues that we're seeing within communities. And I would just love to ask, you know, how do we move beyond these being, you know, a really good example over here, to actually this being embedded within the system change. And there's a wider range of perspective here, but from your personal, you know, insight and experience in sector, you know, what are the next steps, the real tangible action points that we can take forward now, and we can present a government or local authority or sit with developers and say, you need to think about it in this way, because so I'd love to open that out to all of you. I don't know who would like, it's a big question, but I don't know who would like to kick us off with that one. Be like school and I pick one of you. Go on, Lois.
Yeah, I think you're right. We do at the moment, we sort of just have like small pockets of innovation. So I think to embed intergenerational thinking, it probably requires some sort of like systemic change. And I think there's like that growing awareness of the kind of demographic shifts around the aging population, housing challenges for younger people, which obviously has prompted the discussions that we're having. But I think people need to be fully aware of what some of those implications are for people as a bit of a starting point. And obviously, I think conversations like this are a really great opportunity to kind of have that discussion, as well as the APPG, to kind of change that from a sort of systemic level. And I think some of it is around from a kind of like practical level. I think there's something about how we sort of develop housing strategies and policies. So at the moment, lots of housing strategies sort of remain quite age segregated. We might think about older person's housing. I don't think we have that sort of like unifying framework that sort of connects generations, I guess. Local plans. I think if local plans and sort of housing strategies sort of were incentivized or required to kind of do that, it might kind of stop it from being these sort of pilot schemes. And things like the National Planning Policy Framework currently, intergenerational housing isn't directly referenced, although there are potentially a few areas where some of the principles within that could be supportive of an intergenerational approach. So things like it encourages developments to kind of foster healthy communities and safe communities, or supports things like co-housing. But if we had kind of some really embedded intergenerational thinking within some of those structures like the MPF, I think that could go quite a long way to kind of changing it from just those sort of pilot projects, and me saying Melford Gardens is a great example, to kind of lots of others people kind of taking on some of those learnings for themselves. Yeah, quite a challenging question. There's probably lots of other ways that can be it can change as well.
No, some great thinking points there. Does anyone else want to jump in with some thoughts? Omair.
Yeah, I echo what kind of Lois was speaking about, specifically in reference to the National Planning Policy Framework. And there is some kind of slight glimmers of hope there, particularly with the recent update to, I think it's referenced as being paragraph 71, which talks about encouraging more of a mixture of tenure specifically for older people's houses. But I guess it kind of skirmishes around the peripheries of it, skirmishes it around the peripheries of it not really being a central priority for your local planning officer, your case officer team when they're looking at a housing development. Their key priority is kind of how do we meet that housing target of 1.5 million houses, and how are we meeting our targets with regards to local house building policies. There's very little to no discussions being had on the mixing and typology of those houses, and how it's encouraging people to mix together with amongst kind of different ages. And it kind of goes back to what I briefly spoke about in my presentation earlier, and that's the fact that in neighbourhoods, new and existing neighbourhoods, children are seeing fewer and fewer old people that live on their doorstep. And I certainly remember when I was growing up, there was an abundance of older people that didn't need care, and it's a case in question of how can we draw back to that by considering it from a planning policy perspective. And then I think secondly, it's also around local authority strategies outside of planning policy and housing typologies, and thinking around how movements for change are being engendered and promoted, and specifically drawing upon Wigan Council as a specific case study exemplar. They're kind of looking to transition away from something that they've harnessed called the deal towards a strategy called Progress for Unity. And central to that is around how can they create wholesome communities that are driven by purpose, specifically to tackle some of society's social inequalities. At the heart of that is children and older people. And that's quite an exciting development, and that's being led at kind of a senior executive position within the local authority, and they're really pushing that as a movement for social change. And I think looking at that two-pronged approach from kind of local authority vision and strategy and movements, and that philosophy from a social impact perspective, and coupling and teaming that up with local planning policies as well is I think kind of our take and perspective on it. But in many respects, looking at intergenerational housing with the same weight and importance as recent planning policy changes to biodiversity implications, for instance, that's now kind of planning law and policy, but how can it be driven by kind of policy changes?
Yeah, so much in there, Omair, and I think a really good point. I always get excited when you talk about vegan because that's where I grew up, and I think, yes, go vegan. Rebecca and Miranda, I'd love to have your thoughts, but as brief as possible, just so, I know we're coming to an end, but anything you want to add to that?
I suppose
I'd sorry,
there you go. Awkward.
I'll just go. There's one thing that came up for our research was around narrative change. How do we shift the narrative away from, oh, we need to support our old aging generation, to actually these are great reciprocal relationships. So sharing positive stories and shifting the dial on how we think and speak about this is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Miranda.
And I think from a Homes England perspective, it is just where it gets stuck, come and talk to us, because that is our job, to intervene where the market doesn't deliver. So if you've got projects, ideas, thoughts, it's just keep talking to us.
Amazing. And I think a great segue onto sort of my last point, which is absolutely keep the conversation going. You know, it is all about breaking down the barriers and challenging the systems that we currently live in and see day to day. I think what we've heard today is it goes beyond bricks and mortar. It's something that, you know, is inclusive of all of us. It's a responsibility that we all have to try and, you know, move the pin in this area. And as we move forward, kind of celebrating Global Intergenerational Week, I really do encourage you to look out and start these conversations and be part of that change. We also have a webinar tomorrow, which is all around health. So I'll pop that in the chat, but please do sign up. We've got some great speakers who will be part of that tomorrow as well, and kind of paving the way in that wider conversation. And then finally, just a huge thank you to our panelists today. What an incredible range of insight and expertise. We're really grateful for your time. And for anyone interested in finding out more, please do get in touch and we can direct you and share any research or documents that were mentioned on the call today. But yeah, a huge thank you to everyone for spending your lunchtime with us, and happy Global Intergenerational Week. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.